Here we go. So this is Couples Counseling for the Modern Era, which now seeing on screen looks like the college course everybody would drop in the first week. So we need to get a little bit better at naming our talks. In truth, we wanted to talk about the relationship between creatives and strategists and how that can often feel a little bit like a marriage in both the good ways and the challenging ways. One of the things we've noticed that bad communication kills more good work and potentially good weekends than anything else in modern advertising. So we want to get better at that. We want to get more efficient at that. And we want to figure out kind of where those problems are. Oh, good, it works. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about, no, that's just the name of the talk. We're going to go to the next one. Here we go. Who are we? My name is Danny Gonzalez, David Suarez. We are two of the three founders of Bandits Friends, an agency that's about a year old. We're built on the idea that you can't buy attention, you need to steal it, and that you shouldn't treat your clients like jerks, which shouldn't be a huge point of difference, but we've been hearing that it kind of is, which is, has been kind of a learning thing.
I think one thing I would add to that is we're about a little bit over a year old, not quite a year and a half old. We're building out an apartment. We're 16 full-timers now. And I think there's a really interesting story. We're living in it right now where we're able to write the playbook for how these departments work together. I think most of our whole career up until now, and I'm sure for most of you, it's been adopting processes that have already been in place and maybe trying to tweak them. But I think we've had the luxury now of saying, all right, how do we want to do things? How do we want to make things better? And we're hopefully starting to do a good job of that.
But it's a learning process. I mean, we were at JWT, we were at Goodby Silverstein, we were over at Chiat for a while, and those are all places that have storied traditions in both strategy and creative. We were walking into situations that were already built for us, and sometimes we pushed the walls of those, and sometimes it worked out for us, but now starting from scratch, it's caused us to really rethink how this can all work. Just as important as who we are is who do we think we are. I think there's a question you might be asking yourself right now as you think to maybe take a bathroom break or something, but we do think it's important. We're not authorities in this field. We've had struggles with strategy department in the past. We've had good relationships. We've had some tough ones also, but I would say that makes us very qualified to be up here talking because it hasn't come easy. It's forced us to think about it a lot. It's forced us to analyze, do postmortems, do all these things to figure out how to make this relationship work better. So you don't want to learn from a savant. You want to learn from somebody who's kind of struggled through it to figure out what's going on. So let's start from the top. Where's this tension coming from? I know a lot of this fest has been clients and agencies, we speak different languages, how do we kind of bridge that gap? I think the issue and the tension between strategy and creative has a lot more to do with what we have in common. I think we have a lot of the same interests, a lot of the same passions. You figure as a strategist, you're taking all that information, you're taking it to its logical conclusion and then going past that logical conclusion. And to a purist, that might seem like a creative leap, like maybe you're starting to get into our lane a little bit. And as a creative, when you're young, you find out pretty early that if you're not invested in your audience and you're not thinking about what they need and meeting them where they are, you're never going to sell any good work, which is traditionally more maybe of a strategist point of view. So I would argue that the industry is kind of setting us on a crash course to get into each other's lanes. That middle part is all the interesting portions of both of our jobs. It's a very, very scientific graph we made here. But the truth is, we're going to be in each other's space, and we need to embrace that, and we need to be a part of that. But to combat that, a lot of older agencies tended to go into what we call the relay race. And it's basically, let's make space for each one of the disciplines, let's let them do what they do really well, and kind of create a passing of the baton. So you get the brief, you work on it really hard, and then you hand it over to the creative department. Creative department works on that, and they bring it back to you. But what we found is that doesn't really work, and it's not really efficient, even though in theory it seems like it makes a lot of sense, and it feels like the right thing to do to give everyone space. But what happens in practice is a little more like, there goes my clicker. Where are you going, clicker? Clicker? No?
The next slide's so good.
Here we go. How it works is you get the brief, the creatives grumble. Strategy starts researching, doing their thing, working their magic. They write the brief, the creatives grumble. There's feedback on the brief. Then there's a rewrite of the brief. Then there's briefing of the creatives. They grumble again. Creative internal. They're not sharing. They're doing things on their own. They're not letting anybody in. They restart the creative. They go back and forth, back and forth. This creative internal after creative internal. Full internal team. You finally get to see this great masterpiece they've been working on forever without showing you anything, and it may or may not follow the brief that you gave them. And then it's Saturday, and then it's Sunday, and then we're showing the client. Obviously, that doesn't work. That's not even the worst of it, to be honest with you, because this is kind of how it works on paper. But what really happens is we get the brief. Everyone gets the brief at the same time. Strategy goes off to do their thing, to start doing research, try to figure out what's really going on. But the creatives saw the brief also. So they just start working. And they're working off of no brief at all. I see a lot of nodding heads. This has happened a million times over. And they start working. And they start falling in love with things. And they start, listening to podcasts or reading articles on their own and started doing like a little junior strategy work of their own, falling in love with ideas, so that that conversation, that argument that you're having when the brief comes in has nothing to do with the brief that you wrote or the research you did or the truths you found. They're defending the work that they're claiming they hadn't done yet. And there is a reason for that. It's not just because we're selfish know-it-alls. That's a part of it for sure. But it's also that in this relay race setup, creative tends to be the anchor leg. And we do feel that pressure over us that at the end of the day, when we walk up in a new business situation, we're going to be the ones holding the bag if nothing comes of it. So it's out of fear that this sort of thing is happening, and I think the relay race structure creates a world where no one's acting in good faith. And a lot of times, unfortunately, that means that the strategy department is asked to rewrite, even though what they found makes a lot of sense. Because the creative team and the creative directors showed it up to the CCO or somebody, they fell in love, and then they're like, well, let's just backtrack and tell strategy to find things that make this make sense. And that's how we end up at places that might be creatively wonderful but are shallow. And in year two, we're looking for a new brief or they're looking for a new agency. And none of us can really afford that. So we created what we call the group run. I'm going to let David talk for a little bit because I've been chatting along.
Yeah. So the group run, like I said, as we start to develop our own way of working, this is kind of an analogy that we've embraced that is honestly all about efficiency. So much stress in our business is a symptom of timelines, tight timelines that only get tighter and tighter and tighter. So when we get a client brief, strategy is like, let me focus, let me do my job, let me put together a brief, let me do my research. But creatives are also, to Danny's point, they're like, I got to do my job and I have to make sure I have ideas at the end of the table or at the end of the process, or I'm going to get in trouble. So how do we find a way to take that process that Danny showed, where it's step by step by step, the relay race, and just condense it a little bit to give everybody a little bit more time, for one, but also make sure that we're not going in different directions that we then have to maybe find a way to reconcile at the end, which might be two very smart, very insightful, very creative insights or ideas, but they're not the same. And then you have to kind of mash them together, and that's happened many times, and then it ends up feeling disjointed. So we've decided to do 7 very unscientific steps that I'm sure will evolve over time, but this is kind of the base of it for us. But we know our audience, and we know that we can't present something without justifying it first. So we did a little qualitative research. On the next slide. These were our learnings. These are definitely real. Not Mid-Journey and not written by us. But Mark L. from Chicago says, at first I was skeptical, I wanted my own space to work, but now that I've tried group run, I'm a believer. Gina T. from Detroit, my current agency is always doing a relay race and it's so lame. Richard W., as a creative, it can be uncomfortable letting strategists in early. Is something I'll never say again.
Rich.
And Brenda obviously says, holy shit. What an amazing idea. Danny and David have done it again. So just a little light learning there that we did. Step 1, acknowledge the elephants in the room. This can be any sort of elephant in the room. There might be somebody you've worked with on a pitch before that you didn't see eye to eye with. So you should talk about it now. Talk about it up front and say what didn't work, what worked last time. Let's figure it out. there might be bandwidth issues that you have that the rest of the pitch team doesn't have, or strengths or weaknesses. You're just not great at a certain thing, or you're great at a certain thing. Let me lean into that. So kind of acknowledging those things up front. Maybe there's something in the pitch or in the briefing, the initial client briefing, that makes you think, actually, let's break the mold on this. Let's talk about that up front before we start getting into the muscle memory of how we always do every single pitch. So that's just to say, have a conversation, kind of an opening, not a debrief, but like, let's just talk about the plan going into it and acknowledge anything that could get in the way of that plan.
And I was going to add, there are a lot of agencies that are good at postmortems after a pitch or a big meeting, but that all tends to get forgotten before the next meeting. And we're going into a new place. We know there's a little tension with somebody or with a department, and no one's really addressing it because we want to just hope if no one talks about it, maybe it won't happen again.
Step 2, learn the language. We've all heard of campaign platforms, right? Or, wait, are they buckets? Or territories? Or umbrellas or directions? But there's also idea statements and manifestos and manifestos, and there's campaign lines and ad taglines and ad-like objects. There's all sorts of things. You guys get the point. That's another thing. I think as an agency, it really helps, and also communicating with your client about those things. What are we calling what? What's the terminology we're using, but what are the expectations for those things? It seems like a small thing, but I've probably lost days of my life talking about this stuff over the years, if you add them all together. So set it up front, get on the same page, and it'll save you a lot of time. Step 3, identify the core team. I think it's really easy to default to the most senior people slightly involved in the pitch, running the pitch day to day. There might be the CCO, they're in the room all the time, or the CSO, whoever it may be. Realistically, at least in our experience, unless they're really committing to that, they're not going to necessarily have the bandwidth, and they're just going to end up being a bottleneck in a lot of cases. So the other thing, the flip side of that is there's a knee-jerk to include everybody in every meeting. Maybe not the most efficient way to do it. Half the time, people are just there, camera off, not paying attention, or they're not getting their voice heard because there's just too many people in the room on Zoom talking over each other. So identify the core team. The way we like to do it is finding that kind of director-ish level, people that can do the work, they've done the work, and have them run it day to day. And they're responsible. They have the accountability, which I think is a gift, to say, like, you're in charge of this, and not have the confusion of not knowing who's in charge of what. So identify those people, and they have the accountability to, one, manage up to their bosses, whoever's in charge, whether it's the CSO, CCO, but also manage down to the teams. And there's going to be instances where you want those folks in the same room at the same time, but this is just core team, day-to-day running the pitch. I think it's important to keep that team small and nimble and on the same page.
And that'll take discipline from the more senior people. I think what we don't realize at the senior level, the executive level, the founder level, is that when you step into a room, the room does change. So sometimes to allow your directors to have autonomy, you can't be there. And you have to trust them and their instincts, and then talk to them afterwards and potentially guide the ship a little bit. But once you walk in, they're going to default to you, and that's going to change how everything goes.
Directors love that one. This is my favorite one. This is where the magic happens. This is the secret sauce of the group run. And it's kind of weird to say, and people giggle when we say it, but it's true. There's nothing creepy about it. It's called the hunch dump. So this is a process where, like we mentioned, it's the beginning of a process. We hear the client pitch. Everybody gets excited, and particularly creatives generally have nowhere to put that excitement. Like Danny said, we're starting to think. Whether or not we're going full into creative development, we're starting to think. We're starting to gather our own thoughts, insights, ways in, things that excite us. And then at the end of the day, like I said, we have to reconcile those things with where strategy has taken it. So what we like to do is take that core team, and every single day from the time the client briefs the agency throughout the full process of the pitch, meet for an hour, meet for 30 minutes, and talk about what you're thinking. It doesn't have to take up all your time, but all of us are listening to podcasts, reading articles, watching an old stand-up special, an old TV show. Insights come from everywhere. I mean, we personally find stand-up comedians are the most insightful people in the world. They take the ordinary things and spin it in a way that you never thought of, which is kind of our job in a lot of ways. So we reference that a lot. But sit in a room, talk about it, and I think those conversations start to garner more conversations and build on that. And then all of a sudden you're going out of these rooms, and the creatives bought into what we were saying, the strategists are bought into what we're saying. We're having these discussions up front and not waiting till time is not on our side and our back's up against the wall. So we're getting to that creative brief. Everybody's bought in as a united front. And it's fun to say. Disagree. Our favorite thing that some people don't like. I think it's a false narrative to say that a meeting where everybody smiles and nods is a good meeting just because everybody smiled and nods. I think curating a culture where it's okay to disagree, respectfully, of course, I think is going to bring things to the next level, make insights sharper, poke holes in the right way of things you may not have seen. But it's okay to disagree, and I think sometimes it's harder to do that, and sometimes personalities get involved. It makes it harder to do that. But I think if you build a culture where disagreement's okay in a respectful way, I think the ideas and the insights will only get sharper. So reciprocate. Up until now, most of this has been asking more sacrifices from strategy. We're asking you to let us in. We're asking you to disrupt your way of working, to make it easier for us. And I think the reciprocation is when we flip that. When creatives are working, let strategists into the ideas early. Show ideas when they're wet paint. And I think that, again, and don't wait to flesh out every idea perfectly designed, perfectly ready. I think bringing the strategist in as an extension of the creative department, I think, is another way to make those ideas sharper and more cohesive when they come to the finish line. And last but not least, share the victory. At the end of the day, work is a product of the agency. That's what we put out in the world. We can have a lot of meetings, we can do a lot of that sort of things. At the end of the day, people know agencies for the work they put out. Clients know agencies by the effectiveness of the work they put out. So I think sharing that victory amongst all departments, there's a knee-jerk in the industry, at least traditionally, creatives have gotten probably more than their fair share of credit for work when it's out in the world. But I think one thing at our agency we're trying to incorporate is everybody getting credit. So we've started talking about everybody in the agency has a portfolio, a book, a website. You can put it on the company card, your Squarespace account. So have a website, show us the work you're proud of, and allow you to be proud of the work. You're not just a point of the process. You're not just a cog.
Sort of a thing, yeah. I think a lot of times the creatives get praised for how good the work is, but without all the other parts of it, it never happens. And when we're working together, it's not like you're being asked to do leg one of a giant relay race. You're there from the beginning to the end. So there's more buy-in and everything. And we do realize you might be saying, yeah, this is how everyone does it. And if you feel that way, either pat yourself on the back if you're a manager or thank your managers who created that, because we've been in a lot of places where that isn't the default and it causes a lot of pain. Or if you're saying to yourself, we do it a different way and it works really well for us, sincerely, we'd like to hear about it. Like whether it's in the Q&A, which we have a minute left, so maybe not, but we're very findable on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear how you're doing it and how it's working for you, because this is a wet paint kind of thing for us as well.
Fin.
And that is all.
We'll take a couple minutes for questions. So one is, do you think the group-run approach could work at any agency, or does it take a particular kind of culture?
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of trust. The way we survived bigger agencies was by making small agencies within it of people who trusted each other. We've had groups we did not gel with, and something like this wouldn't work, and sometimes it was easier and necessary to create more structured walls and be a little more of a relay race. But I think the ideal is if you're honest and open, you can get there with any group.
And since our event today is focused on strategists as bridge builders, how do you see strategists living into that role in your agency? How do they build those bridges, and where are the opportunities to really make that work for the way that you guys work?
Yeah, I mean, right now our strategists are in every creative room that we're in. I think they're instrumental. Sometimes they're leading with an idea, or sometimes an account person throws an idea, and we're trying to find a way to make that fit and make sense for us. So I think we view strategy as, they're not technically in the creative department, but they're very close to the creative department. They're part of it.
Creative adjacent. And
Yeah.
I would like to recognize that it's a little easier to do when you're 16, 17 people. Let's talk in a year. We hope to grow, and we'll see how that scales, because that does get more difficult. I think these sorts of structures are built for larger agencies, and we'd like to see if we can stay in a small mindset even as we grow.
And perhaps one final question. We agree with everything that your presentation put forward, but what's the best way to disagree with you as the creative heads of an agency?
You can't disagree with us. That's
There's absolutely
draw the line there. No, I think we have, again, maybe it's the size of our agency, but we have a very open door policy. People can talk to us. Sometimes it's a little intimidating to bring things up like that in a group setting, during the meeting, but we tell people as a follow-up, as an email, walk into our office, knock on the door. As long as, like I said during the disagreement part, as long as everybody's respectful about it, we're very open to hearing. Many times we're wrong. So we'd love to hear when smart people come in with smart reasoning as to why they disagree.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.